Now I'm going to move into Carl Jung's Vedic Astrology chart. So Vedic Astrology is the Hindu astrology, what they use in India. And it has a different calculation for the zodiac that's astronomically accurate. So it actually reflects the positions of the constellations, the zodiac signs, as constellations. So I've noticed that it's actually more accurate than Western. It seems like Western is more of a distortion of this information because it's 24 degrees ahead in the zodiac calculation, which I've noticed is not as accurate. I've noticed that Vedic astrology seems to represent people in a more accurate way. And because it's actually astronomically accurate, it makes sense why it would be more accurate. So that's just my experience. Use whatever you want to use, but I go by Vedic astrology. So these are the North Indian style charts that are based on the houses. With these, you look on the left, this is what I'm looking at, the Rashi chart. This is his birth chart. And the one on the right is the Navamsha chart. It means 9 divisions. It's a dissection of the main chart, the birth chart, and it has different uh, hidden layers and meanings into it, and talks more about later life and more of a spiritual purpose. So I'll talk a little bit about that after I talk about his birth chart. So I'll just go through the main things that I see in his chart here. So he's a Capricorn Rising. So that's focused on discipline, responsibility, having a legacy of some kind that he's building. That's what the Capricorn Rising is about. This lesson for this life is about legacy. So what we got to look at first is where the chart ruler is, which is the Saturn is the chart ruler because that rules Capricorn. And it's in the second house in Aquarius. So it's strong in Aquarius, it's in its own sign. But this connects them deeply to education, knowledge, and speech, and wealth and resources and values. Those are all second house stuff. So that's like the main area of life that he's focused on is knowledge, education, speech, those kinds of things. Which is also kind of tied to writing when it was tied to knowledge. Sometimes people say that second house dominant people are writers. So he did a lot of writing. And Saturn's influence is more of a leadership kind of thing. And Saturn is strong in Aquarius, it's its own sign. So that's a strong influence here. Then some other stuff we can look at. I can look at the 10th house. He's got 10th house is the career. So this is the diamond on the right. 10th house is career. So he's got Jupiter there, which is the guru, the teacher, the spiritual presence and guide. So he's got a spiritualized guru kind of influence in his career. So he's the teacher, he's the guru. And it's in Libra. So we'll look at where Venus is because that rules Libra, and it's in the 6th house. So this means that his career is connected to service because 6th house is service, which makes sense because he's in a service-oriented profession as a psychologist. So that's an interesting thing to see there, that connection. It's also connected to healing. Healing and service is the 6th house kind of stuff. And then we can also look to see what else is connected to the 10th house because Jupiter's there. So we'll look at Sagittarius, which is the 12th house. 12th house is isolation, meditation, the foreign world, spiritual world, the inner spiritual dimension of things. He has that connected to his 10th house. So that gives a big spiritualizing influence to his career. And then he also has Pisces in the 3rd house, which is ruled by Jupiter. So there's a connection to the 3rd house stuff. 3rd house is communication, media, the arts on some level sometimes. It's also tied to courage and willpower and stuff like that. But in the modern times, they tie that to media and people who have 3rd house, an active 3rd house, are artist in some form. So what we can say overall for this 10th house, he's got service connection to the career, he's got spiritualized influence in the career, and he's got communication in the career. So that's all pretty cool. So next, let's look at his moon. Moon is the primary planet to look at. It represents your emotions, your mind, your inner feeling nature. And he's a Aries moon. So Aries is, more action oriented and impulsive, more leadership energy. But he's in the nakshatra called Bharani. You look down here, moon is in Bharani. Bharani is ruled by Venus. So this is like a connection to like Mars and Venus energy as his moon, being in Aries, being in Bharani. So what I noticed for people who are Bharani, they have this a tie to creativity. It's basically the symbol for Bharani is the yoni or the vagina, and so it's kind of they talk about it as like a portal of creativity where you're building up getting your creative juices flowing and building up as in kind of a yin way, and then you give birth to creative new things. It's externalizing a deep spiritual nature. So a lot of people who have Bharani going on are usually tied to the occult in some way. They like investigating deep things. And they also have it's common for them to be graphic designers or artists in some form, but they also have a philosophical, deep occult side to them. So that's really interesting to see for his moon. And also his moon is conjunct Neptune. And Neptune is like Pisces. It's kind of like creative, spiritual, dreamy, artistic. So I would say that for him, this Neptune conjunct moon gives him this ability to be really engaged with his active imagination and explore dreams. He has a very dreamy mind overall. So he's able to connect to that very deeply. So that explains why he's so focused on active imagination and dreams in general and studying all that stuff, because his Neptune is conjunct moon. So some other stuff we can look at. Let's see. Let's look at his Rahu. Rahu is also always interesting to look at. He's got Rahu in Pisces. So Rahu is the north node of the moon. It's what you're moving towards in this life, what you crave to experience. So what sign placement it has and house placement shows what area of life you're really focused on learning about and exploring. And then K2 is always opposite. That's the south node of the moon. These are the eclipse points for the sun and the moon. For the moon, I mean. So K2 is the past life focus and that's your storehouse of past life experience, what you're focused on in past lives. And it's always opposite from Rahu. So you're moving from one area to the opposite side always with Rahu K2. So his K2 is in Virgo in the 9th house. So what that indicates is K2 with Virgo, it's heavy analytical ability. He probably came into this life with a deep level of able to analyze things very deeply. That's ruled by Mercury. And so actually you can see Mercury's in Gemini. It's in its own sign. That's the dispositor, the controller of K2. So it's strong in its own sign, and it's connected to service. So his K2 is in the 9th house, which is higher philosophy, gurus, more of a spiritual, higher, your own truth, your own deeper philosophy. So he's focused on past lives, on philosophy a lot, and a deeper understanding of things, a higher knowledge. So he's actually moving away from that in this life to the opposite side, which we'll talk about in a second. But this is tied to the 6th house, which is service. So his philosophy is tied to service. So he feels like to really focus on my philosophy, I need to be tied to a service-oriented profession. So that's what that indicates. And then so his Rahu is on the opposite side, and it's in Pisces in the third house. So Pisces means that he's really exploring more of the it's a water sign, so it's more emotional, it's creative, it's spiritual. He's opening up to more of a united energy, emotional, intuitive, spiritual side of things instead of being so heavily analytical. He's moving more and more towards the spiritual dimension of things. And then it's in the third house, which means he's learning about communication. How do I connect to people on a more grounded way that people can understand where I'm coming from. It's kind of like coming from Sagittarius to Gemini. That's kind of what this ninth house, third house axis is for his K2 and Rahu. So you can look at it as I'm in past lives I was focused on my own philosophy, and now I'm really focused on bringing my own philosophy into a more grounded way that people can relate to. It's more scientific, it's more grounded, and so that's where he's got more of his energy focused. So actually, somebody else who has that is Jordan Peterson. He's got K2 in the ninth house, and he's got Rahu in the third house. It's the same kind of thing. So people with that are really have their own philosophy already built in from past lives, and here they're trying to provide it to people and communicate it to people in a grounded way. So, so that's his Rahu, and like I said before, his Rahu is controlled by Jupiter, which is the 10th house. So his 10th house is really connected. His career is really connected to his communication, which is his big area of focus in his life. Okay, so we did that, and now let's talk about his sun a little bit. His sun's in Cancer in the 7th house, conjunct Uranus. So his ego, his deeper soul and personality is in the Cancer, in the sign Cancer, which is a water sign. It's a cardinal sign, so it's one of the stronger signs. Very emotional, intuitive, and it's conjunct Uranus, and Uranus is very future thinking, rebellious in some ways, but kind of the new, like bringing in new, strange, unexpected philosophy or breakthroughs or different things like that. So he has Uranus kind of energy tied to his sun, his ego, his soul. So it makes him a little bit different, kind of like having a special, especially ties to breakthroughs and new unexpected ways of looking at things. So that's really interesting. And so these are both, his sun is in the 7th house, which is a focus on partnerships and business and relationships, his one-on-one connections with others, the contracts he makes with other people. So that's a big area of focus because Sun is one of the primary planets. So he's going to be focused on his partnerships and his relationships a lot. And then you can look to see what rules his Sun, sign-wise. It's in Cancer, so it's ruled by the moon. And his moon's in the 4th house, so he has a connection between his business partnerships and his home life or his mother. That's what 4th house stuff represents. But it's also just the internal, emotional, private world. So he's connecting his partnerships to the internal world, his private life in some form. That's what you can say archetypally for that. And then one of the last things I wanted to say for his Rashi chart is his Atmakarka, which is Mars, and it's in Scorpio. So Atmakarka is the planet that's at the highest degree in a sign. So his Mars is at 29 degrees of Scorpio. So basically it spent than any other planet. So it's the most evolved of all the planets, and this represents his soul on the deepest level. That's what Atmakarka means. It's like soul significator. So this is really interesting because Mars in Scorpio, it's in its own sign, and it's focused on uh the deeper underlying truths, uncovering these things. It's focused on the occult, um, the shadow, kind of, you could say, the hidden aspects of things. That's what Scorpio kind of represents. And it's in the 11th house. So he has a lot of his drive and energy focused on gains, on his goals, on his connections with others through friends and his community. So his soul is focused on his connection to his community, to friends, and to the greater world. So he has a lot of energy for that. And let's see what that's tied to. We got to see. Oh yeah, it's ruled by Scorpio is ruled by Mars, so that's strong there. And then it's tied to the 4th house. So his friendships, his goals, his aspirations, his gains are all connected to his emotions, his inner private life. That's basically what that means, because uh, because Aries is in the 4th house, and Mars is in the 11th house. So that's the connection between the 4th house and the 11th house. So yeah, that's everything I see in his chart there, in his birth chart. So what we can say overall, he's got an intuitive mind. It's very dreamy with the Moon Neptune. He's got the Rahu and Pisces in the 3rd house, so he's moving towards the spiritual, emotional, intuitive, creative side of things, and then also communicating in a grounded way. From past lives, he was focused on his own philosophy and was very analytical. His career is tied to service, and he's the teacher in this life because his career has Jupiter in the 10th house. And his career is going to be very spiritual because it's tied to the 12th house with Sagittarius there. And then it's also very communication based because of the 3rd house connection to the 10th house with Pisces in the 3rd house and Jupiter in the 10th. And then the focus on education, speech, and knowledge in general with Saturn and Aquarius ruling the 1st house. That's a big thing. So yeah, that's everything in his birth chart. Now I want to highlight some stuff in his Devamsha. Devamsha is another main chart that people look at, the Vedic astrologers look at. That's basically, it means 9 divisions. So they basically dissect each of the signs in the birth chart and they cut it up into 9 pieces. And so within each of those 9 pieces, they label them based on the signs. So it's at the same order of the signs, but it goes through 9 different signs per one sign in the Rashi chart, in the birth chart. So it's like you're dissecting and looking deeper into it to see what kind of energies are present there. So it puts all the different planets in different signs, and sometimes it's in the same sign. When it's in the same sign, it's called Virgotama, which means that it's very powerful because it has the same energy. And he actually has one planet in Virgotama. It's Jupiter. So Jupiter is in Libra in both charts. You can see that. So that's one of his strongest planets is his Jupiter. And then some other things that are really important to look at here. One of the main things I see is he's got a yoga here, a really powerful yoga in the 7th house of his Navamsha. He's got Saturn in Libra, so Saturn's exalted in Libra. So Saturn's strong, discipline, responsibility, legacy, all that kind of stuff, and connected to partnerships really deeply. But then it's even reinforced even more because of its connection to the 5th house of the Navamsha, which is ruled by Sun, and Sun is also in the 7th house. So it makes a connection between the 5th and 7th house. And then the 9th house, which is the house of luck in general. And that has Sagittarius there, so that's ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is also the 7th house. So the 7th house is connected to the 2 luckiest houses, the 5th house and the 9th house, and which are connected there because of the Sun and Jupiter being there with Saturn in the 7th house. So basically, for partnerships, especially later in life, because Navamsha represents later life, he's going to have a very strong karma for powerful relationships and partnerships. So that's really interesting to look at there. Some other things we can look at is Rahu's in Sagittarius in the 9th house. That's a lot moving towards higher philosophy in his later life. K2 and Gemini in the 3rd house, coming from focus on communication with others and connecting different ideas. And Rahu's Sagittarius is more his own truth. His moon moves into Scorpio in the Navamsha. So it's like more Scorpio energy, deep investigative, metaphysical, occult kind of energy. And his ascendant is Aries, so he's like a leader. And his Mars rules the ascendant, his Navamsha ascendant, and Mars is in the 12th house in Pisces. So it's more spiritual energy connected in his Navamsha. So overall, we can see for the Navamsha, he has strong connection to his karma for his relationships, especially in later life. And then higher philosophy with Rahu, and then spiritualized influence with the Navamsha ruler in Mars. So that's everything in his Vedic astrology charts. You can see he's got the service-oriented stuff. He's got analytical ability. He's got dreamy mind. He's got spiritualized influence and focus. He's got communication focus, knowledge and education, discipline, responsibility, and legacy with the Capricorn Rising. So you can see all those factors. And that's very evident in his life, being a psychologist in the service-oriented profession, communicating about deeper issues and hidden things like, the active imagination and dreams, with his moon Neptune kind of stuff. And his Scorpio Mars and his moon in Scorpio in the Navamsha. So he's got some Scorpio energy there. So yeah, very interesting chart. So that's it for his Vedic astrology.